I am a family medicine resident on active duty, and I've been wondering about the implications of purchasing a home while serving in the military. Obviously, the big hurdle is that I would have to move about every 3 years, and with all of the fees associated with home buying and selling, it normally doesn't make financial sense. I have two questions. What do you think about living on base and giving up all of your housing allowance? And what do you think about buying a house, living in it for 3 years, and then renting it out after we move? I just really can't stand the idea of renting for 20 years when we are totally capable of affording a house now. Thank you again for all that you do.
Okay, this is a classic question I get a lot. Should I buy a house while I'm in the military? And the easy answer is no. Don't buy a house while you're in the military. I cannot emphasize this enough. It was interesting. While I was preparing for this podcast, my father-in-law is over here helping us move in. This is actually the first podcast I'm recording at my new desk. We're in our studio. We're back in the new house. This is great. But he's helping us move in. And so while I'm preparing this podcast, he's sitting there listening to this question from Josh on the speak pipe. And he's like, oh man, I wish I could go back and do it over again. I asked him, how much money did you make all those years in the military with all those houses you bought? Because he probably bought 5 or 6 houses over the course of, I think it was a 26 or 28 year career. And he said, we didn't make money. And he didn't. He said, we came out ahead on one of them, and all the other ones were money losers because it just doesn't make sense to do either of the two things you do when you buy houses in the military. And the first thing you do is buy and sell every 3 or 4 years. And it's just not long enough in there that the appreciation makes up for the transaction costs. And the second thing you do is you do a PCS, a change of station. You basically move to another base and you leave that house behind as a rental. And now you're a long distance landlord. You know, one of his long distance landlording experiences was pretty interesting. He found out there was something like 25 people living in the house, all of whom were working in relatively low wage jobs. He thought he was renting it to one family, and it ended up seriously being like 6 families in there living in the house. And obviously it was pretty trash by the time they got done. But you know what? Long distance landlording is not awesome. Buying and selling a house every 3 or 4 years is not awesome. But that's kind of the deal when you sign up with the military. Yes, it's possible to get lucky and make some money every now and then. But on average, you're not going to do well with that approach. If you're not going to stay in a house for at least 5 years, you know, that's kind of the 50-50 break-even point in my view. And unfortunately, most people just don't run the numbers. They just look and see, oh yeah, I sold it for more than I bought it for. But they don't take into account all the other costs of home ownership. And when you do that, you realize that financially, at least, it is not a good idea to buy a house while you're in the military. Now, if you are okay with spending some money and realizing it's a consumption item and you really just want to own instead of rent, or it's really for some reason difficult location to rent in, buy a house, but realize that you're probably going to lose money on it. It's just really hard to build any sort of equity long-term while you're in the military. If you want your questions answered by the White Coat Investor, record your question at whitecoatinvestor.com/YQA. or click the link in the description.